Nonprofit and philanthropic leaders devote their lives to the service of others, but sometimes they need a little help. Kristine Michie has been deep in the work and the play of helping changemakers grow their impact for decades. So whether you're ladling soup at a local shelter or attending a UN peace conference, you need to find the balance between the heavy work and a light touch so you don't burn out. And Kristine believes play is at the center of that. Welcome to the PlayFull Podcast, bringing fun to the serious work of changing the world.
Oh, welcome everyone back to the PlayFull Podcast. And today our guest, Nicholas Ma, is with us. We are kicking off with this episode, our Interfaith Dialogue series, which we've called Thoughts and Prayers, which is sort of a refrain that we're familiar with, especially after tragedies. And no one can really kind of conjure up what to say about that. And we've kind of landed on this. Our thoughts and prayers are with the people and all of us. And commentary that, and a feeling that that's insufficient. Although, I would like to maybe make a maybe say thoughts and prayers are something. So anyways, I'm excited, Nicholas, that you're here to tell us about your film, Leap of Faith, and a whole body of work that we're really excited to talk about.
I'm so glad to be here. It's really such a pleasure, and I love the work that you do, and I'm grateful to be among those people that you talk to.
Thank you so much. All right, folks. So Nicholas is an award-winning filmmaker. I thought it was really fun, and I love the alliteration. Has made films on subjects ranging from botany to basketball. And I love that. And I'd love to hear about, and I also know before you were a filmmaker, you were a consultant at McKinsey. You also worked on The Hill for John Kerry, the senator in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. How did all this happen?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I grew up in an artistic family. My father's a musician. My mother played music and loves music, and for me, going to work as a consultant was my great act of rebellion. It was like,
Oh,
oh, I'm going to stick it to the man and go work at a consulting firm, and I think I was proud of it. It was a nice place to be that was like totally different from what I was doing and for sort of where my heart was and where I had grown up. But it also wasn't the place that I wanted to be long term. And it took me a while to find the courage to sort of say, this is who I want to be. This is what I want to do. And I'm so glad I did. But I also recognize that, it does take that courage to step out and declare yourself. And I have a huge amount of admiration for people that do that and do that earlier than I did. It took me 10 years to figure that out. So
yeah. Nick, had you been around? Of course, your father had probably he'd been around when films had been made about him, and other sort of media had been around him. Had you, as a kid and young man, witnessed that, and had that sparked any of that interest, or did it come from a totally other place?
theater was the thing that I loved as a kid. Just going to the theater was just um, this transporting experience. And, I remember going to see plays like Yasmina Reza's Art or Copenhagen or musical theater, all of this stuff, whether it was high-minded or whether it was just rollicking and fun, that was just transporting for me. And then I visited a friend who was a filmmaker and who was editing a film, and I remember the first time he told me that all the sound in a film is fake, right? That all gets put in after the fact. Most of it, the Foley gets put in after the fact, etc. All of the sound design, and I remember just being like my jaw dropped,
Like
and I
mine
was like,
just
wait, there's
did.
something that's yeah, there's something that's even more immersive than theater. It's like you sit in theater and then you realize, oh no, film, the contract that you have with your viewer is, I'm going to give you 90 minutes of my time, and you better give me something. You're going to give me a totally different reality, and it better be good because it's got to be worth 90 minutes of my entire universe that I'm giving to you. So, it always felt like a big contract to make with someone, but also like a really high bar to say, okay, well, what's going to be worth it for someone to give up 90 minutes of their life to someone else's world?
And did you land on documentary filmmaking first, or did you toy around with kind of more just sort of fiction and sort of more to film for entertainment versus entertainment and learning?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the beauty of film is that it um, is this sort of shared reality, right? It's like this empathy. it's like empathy steroids. You know what I mean? Like you can't help, even if the main character of a movie is a real, you know, baden,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
still you're with them in every moment, and you don't want them to, you're just like, you know,
yeah, yeah.
so there's something really beautiful about what it does. And I think that's true with scripted film as well as with documentary film. The botany film I made was a scripted film about a young girl whose best friend was a small potted plant named
Oh,
Mabel,
oh.
and about the way in which, as a 12-year-old girl, you can sometimes feel very overlooked by the world, and plants can also feel overlooked by the world. So I think there's ways of using that tool in all of its meat in all of its different ways. But I love documentary. I maybe it's because I came to film late. I think the world is so fascinating that, sometimes you don't need to make it up for it to be uh,
Mm.
really riveting. So.
Wow. That's a now more than ever comment. And let me before we talk about Leap of Faith, what can you tell us about the film about the Brooklyn Nets?
Oh my gosh. So it was about the WNBA team, the New
Oh,
York
the
Liberty,
Liberty, the Liberty. Thanks.
and they are just incredible. There is a kind of, it's interesting because I think about the word faith with a capital F or with a lowercase f, and how closely related they are. They have kept the faith since the league was founded more than 25 years ago, saying, we're just going to play amazing basketball. And, they had owners who moved them outside of the city, and all sorts of things happened. But, they ended up winning the championship and ended up sort of proving to the world that this is basketball that's worth watching. Their NBA colleagues knew it for a long time, right? Steph Curry, et cetera. They were all front row of WNBA games, but it's taken, 25 years for the country to catch on that they were missing out on some of the best basketball that's being played. So,
Oh, I love it. And George and Clara Sy, who own
mhm.
both the Nets and the Liberty, they have a really big philanthropic footprint in New York and Brooklyn. And Greg Bishop, who runs part of their foundation, has been on the podcast. So there's
Oh,
a
amazing. I
uh,
love Greg. Yeah. And Joe and Clara are really committed to Brooklyn as a as not just a place, but also as an idea. Like
yeah.
maybe this is something, it embodies all the problems that the world can
Yeah.
face, but also the possibility
Yeah.
that can happen when you bring extraordinary people together. So,
I love it. Okay. So you were talking about film, scripted film, and documentary to really like uh, take us to and through a moment and see what we can kind of like pull out of it, right, for our own betterment. And in this moment, this sort of crucible that we're in, where we're, grasping for what next and how do we find our way out, I believe Leap of Faith, and I had the privilege of getting to watch it. Thank you so much for sending me the access code so I could see and screen it. Really, really moved me. And I have been, as in preparing for this series that I was just describing, this thoughts and prayer series, really curious about, whether or not faith and people of faith, lowercase, uppercase, maybe both, right? How we can find that to be our third thing. I talk a
mm,
lot about the third thing. The ice cream is a third thing. That's kind of why it became like the center of the podcast. Like kind of whatever else you got going on, how about ice cream, right? Whatever else you got going on, like if we can find something else to come to. So in the movie, um, Christianity is that third thing. And you've got, I don't remember if I remember counting, was there 16 people,
it's
12?
12 pastors that are part of the
12.
group, and Michael is the leader of the one who's brought them all together.
And they
Yeah.
all represent different Christian denominations, but another third thing they have is Grand Rapids, Michigan, right? So
Yeah.
there's these third things that bring them together. So where'd the idea come from? And what'd you do first? How'd you pick Grand Rapids? I'd love to hear all about that.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about documentary is it forces the control freak that lies at the core of every filmmaker to sort of take a pause, because you have to let reality unfold.
Mm.
Um, I had made a movie in 2018 with Morgan Neville called Won't You Be My Neighbor about Fred Rogers. And at the end of that movie, there was this real sense of nostalgia, and people would come up to me saying, where are the Fred Rogers of today? We need more Fred in the world. And it was a very beautiful, but also troubling question. I didn't have an answer, and as time passed and as things seemed to get worse, right, this sort of our division, our sense of hopelessness seemed to increase. Um, I came across Michael writing in the Wall Street Journal about his work in bringing congregations together across different, saying, okay, you might all believe different things, but you all come to the same place on Sunday morning. What could that mean? Could you be able to stick together? And I was just interested enough that I wrote him an email, and we started corresponding and Zooming and all of that. And um, I, along the way, Morgan and I would check in and say, is there a movie here? And we'll sort of shake our heads saying, I don't know if there's a movie here. And then Michael said, I really want to bring a group of pastors together to see if maybe there's something that's big enough to hold pastors together from wildly different political, theological, socioeconomic, racial, all the divides you can imagine. And I thought, I don't know if there's a movie here, but I'm really curious what those people would say in that room. What do a bunch of pastors say when they're being candid with each other?
Mm.
And Michael said, well, if I bring a group of pastors together, would you want to start filming it? I was like, sure, we'll see. I can't promise there's a movie, but I'm interested enough to start. And as it progressed, it defied every assumption about what I thought was going to happen next. And, somehow it was like the the 12 Angry Men, um, Christian Grand Rapids Pastors Edition, it's like, and you sort of realize, wow, we have such confidence in how we think conversations are going to unfold, how things are going to happen between people. And when you realize you're wrong, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It means, what possibility have I not considered that might
Mhm.
exist in the world?
Yeah. So I thought, and I got to tell you, I was at first a little disappointed, and then I got into a new space, which was I thought there was going to be a Hindu and a Buddhist and a Muslim and a rabbi. Like I really thought there was going to be all kinds of denominations, not just denominations within Christianity. Um, so I'm honest to say I was like, oh wait, where's the rabbi, right? Where's the imam? Um, and then as I continued experiencing the movie, I realized that what I thought I was noticing and experiencing was there was more opportunity for learning because again they had another third thing. Christianity might have, they amongst each others or those watching us assuming, well, they're going to have so much in common, what are they going to really quibble about, right? um and they had to really fine tooth comb and be in the all this gray area with each other. And so I'm wondering, did you at any point, now it sounds like the origin story of it was with Michael and his intention, but did you ever think, oh, should we bring in some other denominations, non-Christian leaders into this conversation? And how did you think that might change it? And was there a decision not to do that?
I mean, it's such a great question. And it's the same thing we asked ourselves with, should we bring pastors from across the country or around the world if we keep it within Christianity? Why just keep it in Grand Rapids? Why just keep it Christian? Uh, on the faith question, I think one of the things we forget in this country is how much disagreement there is within Christianity.
Mhm.
Right? And I think about those interfaith conversations and I think, who are you asking to represent a Christian perspective? Because
Oh.
gosh, that's not a role that's credible,
Mhm.
right? It's like, are you going to get a Catholic priest to do it? Because I can tell you there are a whole chunk of people that think that that's not legitimate. Are you going to
Right.
get an evangelical pastor? Because I can think of a whole bunch of people who think that that's not legitimate. And so we have to ask ourselves these questions that if we don't start at the right level,
Mm.
we're not building on a firm foundation, right? And so if Christians in Grand Rapids can't talk to each other, then what even does it mean for us to have an interfaith global dialogue, right? And so I asked myself this question, okay, well, maybe that's because I had that same moment, is this big enough? And I realized, no, part of the challenge is we're worried about, can we talk to our neighbors? We're worried about, can we talk to the people that live a town over, let alone halfway across the country? So let's start there and see what might happen in those rooms.
I love that. I did have that experience. Thank you. You gave me that right through the film. It also made me think that if it had been bigger, so to speak, in that way, it could have stayed just really theoretical. Oh, I that's fine with me if someone's Buddhist. That's fine with me if someone's Hindu. Like I'm not really having to stretch in the
Right.
same way as if I have met someone where we've agreed that we share a label, and then we start peeling away what's behind that label.
And we
And
have to live in the
and
same city as each other.
yes, and I was thinking that too, back to the Mr. Rogers movie, neighbors, they are
Yes,
neighbors. So it wasn't when they spoke about and when they quoted the gospel around love your neighbor as yourself and do unto others, they were going to bump into those people at the supermarket. Right. They
that's right.
actually are. So they also, that wasn't another luxury they would have, like, oh, I love my neighbor. Oh, there's one. Like,
Right. Right.
oh, it was brilliant.
And that's where I feel so grateful for, the pastors at the end of the movie said, our one question is, how are you going to represent the Holy Spirit in this movie? And I can tell you that's never a question you want to hear as a filmmaker, because you're like, I have no idea. Like, that is like, if people were, I mean, gosh, that's way too high of a bar to ask a filmmaker. Uh, but what I love about the question is that reminder that there's something else at work, right? That I didn't in advance conceive of this conversation, this city, these people. There was something else at work that brought these people into my life and me into theirs. And I'm so grateful for what it allowed me to see and for what it allowed us each to see in each other.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glancing down at some of the notes I took. Folks, I was telling Nicholas before we started recording that, when I was watching, I thought I would just pop popcorn and watch. Don't, but I'm like, oh, I have to get out a pen and paper and make some notes. This is so good. Um, so one of them was the conversation early on about the church having become mute
Mm,
during this time, and one of the pastors was contrasting that to during the civil rights movement and civil rights era, how the church really led, and
mm.
kind of where is the church and the church's voice at this time. Do you feel like the film is giving the church some voice through these 12 voices?
Yeah, I think the the film was a big ask of these pastors, right?
Mm,
You got to step up and be honest and on camera. You can't, this is, if you're going to try to wiggle and do, fancy footwork, people are going to see it. So what are you going to do? And it was a big ask of them. And I think what it helped me realize, and I think helped them realize as well, is part of what church or any faith tradition does is make that ask of people, right?
mm,
Is to say it's got to be an ask. Or you're asking someone to reach deeper into their sort of moral core to ask the big questions. And I think that we've thought of church or faith or all of these questions as sort of a consumer tradition. How do we make it as easy as possible?
mm,
Right. But maybe that's not what people actually want. Maybe people want to be asked to do something hard. And
mm,
when we get asked to do something hard, we're really proud of ourselves when we meet that bar. It's like I'm much more proud when I do something difficult than when I do something easy or punch my card. So
yeah, there's a phrase I've heard or expression, which is how do you get esteem, do esteemable things, and and the hard things are esteem building, right?
that's
Certainly,
exactly right.
I could certainly witness those relationships deepening and developing in the movie. I loved at the end when they reintroduced themselves, and they reintroduced each other, having spent that time together. Remind me, were they together on and off for a year?
That's right.
Yeah. And how often did they meet?
So they came together for 3 week-long offsites, but they were
Mhm.
together once a month at least,
Mhm.
for dinners or conversations or sessions. And they still get together now, which is beautiful to me.
Yeah.
I think so often there's a sense that, oh, let's just get to the finish line and then we don't have to
Uh,
see each other again. But they've chosen to remain in community with each other. And, you've watched the movie. Um, it's not so obvious that that's going to be the choice when you're
yeah.
sort of, when you
Yeah.
get into the middle of it. So.
Were you the person in the asking the question seat?
Yeah, I was the person in the asking the
Okay,
question seat.
okay.
Yeah.
Is that I guess is that the way to say it? That doesn't sound very formal. Maybe the interviewer.
No, no, but it's very descriptive, which matters more.
So I love this question you asked, which was so you were asking each of the 12 about Michael, who was sort of their facilitator, the leader of the effort. What do you think he's doing? And what do you think he thinks he's doing? I love that. Tell me about that question. And did you get out of it what you expected?
I I think we all like, and maybe you feel this way too, because you're in the question asking seat, that
Yes.
you think that you're in control and that you have a plan and that this is the thing that's happening. And then you look back and you think, oh gosh, there was something else going on. How did I, wow, we don't always have that visibility onto ourselves. And that's particularly true in a documentary. And I think Michael went into it thinking, oh, all the action is going to happen amongst these pastors, and not realize that it would subsume him, it would subsume me, it would sort of subsume the audience. And I think that that's sort of the beauty of great documentary subjects, that they reach out and grab you into what's going on. I loved the pastor's answers because they there was a kind of generosity as well
Mm,
as acknowledgement.
yeah.
A generosity that, yeah, maybe Michael isn't fully aware of everything
Yeah.
that's happening.
Yeah.
Um, and that's okay. There's something else at work, and we're as present for that as we are for
Mm,
what Michael thinks is happening. And I
yeah.
think um, we try to practice that generosity with our peers,
Yeah.
um, not always with our leaders or the people, or those people we sort of hold to say, no, no, you should know what you're doing, but none of us really are fully always aware of what
Yeah.
we're doing or how it's affecting the world.
He so here's what it seemed to me I learned about Michael and the experience. So Michael's sort of a main character, so to speak,
Sure.
for those that will see the film. Um, he came to understand or question even how his mission, intention, and desire for these people to come together and find a way to build community and cross divides. Um, I think he came to realize that he thought he might be driven by a desire. He has two children who are sort of, one actually non-binary and another with some special needs, and that he became to wonder out loud in front of us watching him, was he doing this because he was trying to create a loving community for his own children? Was he trying to
Mm,
ensure that there was a loving community for his his family to experience, versus maybe thinking when he started it was more of a professional endeavor, to have
mm.
create cohesion amongst pastors in Grand Rapids. Um, is I mean, I guess I can't ask you, did I get that right? Because it's all an experience of watching a film,
Yeah.
right? But that seemed like an aha he was having that then we got to have as an audience member.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of what's beautiful is that third phase, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like this tension between the personal and the professional. And then at some point, there is this realization that maybe there's something that unlocks that tension without either side not being
Mm,
true,
mm,
right? Um, you be who you are, I'll be who I am, and we'll get through this together.
yeah.
He says that in the film, and I think about it a lot because I think at this moment, we kind of think only two of those things can be true at a time,
Right.
right? Either you have to change or I have to change, or we're definitely not getting through this together, right? And that notion that all three of those things can be true, that you can actually be who you are and I can be who I am and we can get through this together,
Yes.
somehow that feels like it's too much pressure, it's gonna break. And when you realize that not only does that not need to break, but that can be the most beautiful truth, that to me is something that I struggle to hold on to, but I feel more able to hold on
Mm.
to after this film than I did before.
Yeah. Let me ask you about that. Are you feeling more resilient, hopeful? Are you feeling that you have new tools as your own person in this time where we're being told we have to choose sides, and we're being told that, things have never been so bad, or from some people, some like experience say it's been this bad. It's always been this bad. Now you just more of you are aware of it. I mean, there's all these different truths happening. How did the experience of the film and creating the film change you, and what are you hoping it's going to give all of us as a tool as you take this on the road and share it around the country?
Yeah, I feel profoundly changed from
Mhm.
making it. I hope that people who watch it receive some small portion of that. It was such a gift to me. Um, we took the film around the country and did these focus groups, and it launched us into creating these festivals, these American Revival festivals around the country, as an effort to communicate the vision that these pastors discover for themselves. And I think when we talk about how good it is, how bad it is, what are the disasters that we're facing, we tend to be talking at a very high level in an abstract set of terms, right? More the conversation that might happen in an interfaith dialogue or a cross
Mhm.
country pastors, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and when I look at the community level, there's so much that's still going right.
Mhm.
When tornadoes ripped through Rogers, Arkansas, or floods ripped through Waverly, Tennessee, or fires ripped through Altadena, California, neighbors stepped up, right? And those are places that are very different, right? I don't think a lot
Mhm.
of people in Rogers think of themselves as being having the same worldview as people in Pasadena, but their neighbors all did the same thing, right? Um, and that to me is really beautiful, right? That neighbors would say, okay, well, look, your kids don't have a home. Let me
Yeah.
take them to school. Let me give them dinner. You need to figure yourself out. I got them. That's just what you do. Not only is it what you do, it doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like the best version of yourself. You're like, this
Mhm.
is who I want to be. I want to be the person that when my neighbor's house burns down, I'm right there.
Yeah.
Not because I think my house is going to burn down the next day, but because that's who I want to be in the world.
Yeah.
And so when that gets corrupted and altered and warped through the ways we talk about what's happening with people we don't know and places we've
Mhm.
never been, that conversation has become really terrible.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's actually changed the underlying fact that most of us want to be the person who picks up our neighbor's kids if their house burns down. So how do we how are both of those things true, and how do we sort of let them allow each other to sort of act with less force? It's like that Michael personal professional thing. It's like, I'm so mad at this person that I don't know, and I really believe I need to stand up for something that's really important. And I want to be the person that picks up my neighbor's kids.
Yes.
What does that mean is possible for me? And I don't know the answer to that question, but it's a question that's really interesting to me, and it's a question that's really beautiful to me, and it's a question that I think has a lot of hope at the core
Yeah.
versus fatalism.
Yeah. One of the surprises of the film that the pastors experienced and gave voice to, and we experienced as an audience, is that there was this one issue, which around sexual orientation, uh,
Mm,
and marriage equality and all of that kept coming up. And I think you probably nobody knew at the outset that that would be so. And even during, there was one point where one of the pastors said, well, kind of like, aren't we going to talk about gun control? Aren't we going to talk about immigration? What are all these other issues, right? That also probably we don't agree on, that we could talk about and get into. And it kept coming back to this sexual orientation conversation. And there was one pastor in particular who is a lesbian woman, pastor, who kind of had to carry a lot of that burden, conversation, opportunity. And tell me about how that was to be rolling film while that happened and kept happening.
it's wild because I don't think there's a single pastor in that group that would say the most important issue facing Grand Rapids is one of sexual orientation, right? I don't think there's a single pastor that would say that. Um, and yet they kept coming back to that topic. And it was maddening because it felt like, why are we devoting all of the airtime to this topic when we all agree there are other topics that are more urgent? What I came to realize is it was the topic they didn't know how to talk about. It was the topic they didn't have the words for. They had the words to talk about how they disagreed about gun control. They had the words to talk about how they disagreed about immigration. They had the words to talk about how they disagreed about race. And it was a group that embodied racial differences, right? 5 of the 6 pastors were African American. One of them is a Chinese American pastor, right? It was a group that embodied, gender differences, right? There were 5 women and 7 men. Like, it was a group that embodied all those differences. They could have taken on any of them. They were all laid out in the group, but this was the one they couldn't avoid. And I think it's because they didn't know what the words were. And what I really admire is that somehow they didn't let that stop them from trying,
Yeah.
right? I think we live in a moment right now where if we don't have the words for something, we run hard in the other direction, because to not have the words feels like it's a recipe for an explosion and sort of the dissolution of relationship. But they built relationship and they found words, and while they didn't necessarily change their opinions about their interpretation of scripture, or about their belief in sexual orientation, um, they changed their posture to each other. It felt like all of a sudden, oh, well, we believe these things and we belong to each other. And I don't think that's such an easy thing to say. I don't think that means that they all feel like they would feel equally comfortable with anyone who held those views or anyone of a different sexual
Mhm.
orientation. But with these people,
Mhm.
they knew they
Yeah.
had each other's back. Right before the film came out, they were really after I showed them the final cut, they got really anxious, about what was going to happen. And they had a meeting together, and I wasn't there. I heard about it after the fact. And the thing that I thought was amazing is they all looked at each other and they said, I have your back. Like,
Oh.
if someone comes for you, I've got your back. And that was so beautiful, because again, they're not saying I've got the back of your scriptural interpretation or anything like, but I've got your back as a human being. It's the I will pick up your kids
Mm-hmm.
if your house burns down. And I think that is, I wish we all felt that more from people that were different.
Yeah. One of the notes I made was a quote was around, I can't remember who said it, but when doctrine overshadows relationship,
Yeah.
that kind of was what they were struggling with.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think sometimes we can be impatient
Mm.
with doctrine, as if doctrine gets in the way of relationship. And I think there is beauty in doctrine as well, right? Like, that's the thing that's so tricky, right? That we how do we let those coexist, versus saying to someone, you shouldn't believe this because it's bad for me, right? Like, that's this subtle thing that I think, particularly when we have conversations. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and when you're in Brooklyn, people will say things like doctrine is just bad.
Mm.
And I think we forget that doctrine is about moral formation, right? Like, how do we know what's good and how do we choose what's good? And we have to wrestle with something. And if we're not wrestling with anything, then what happens when the questions get hard? We don't have the practice, we don't have the
Right.
muscle memory.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think, yeah, one of the pastors says, when doctrine overshadows relationship, I think she would also say relationship shouldn't replace doctrine either.
Mm.
Somehow those things have
Another
to
duality.
live, and we learn and they inform each other and grow into something more beautiful.
Yeah. I love it. All right. Let's go get ice cream.
Oh,
I
fantastic.
know.
I'll be right
Finally, right?
back.
Okay. Folks, Nicholas is going to go grab his ice cream. I've got mine right here, and we'll see what he selects. We'll be right back. Okay. All right. So this is just always the moment, right? So I'm just dying to see what flavor you chose.
Okay, well, this
Oh, good.
is
There's
an
a story.
unusual situation because it is my mother's favorite ice cream that I
Whoa.
happen to have here. And so this is in her honor. So it's an old-fashioned butter pecan.
Oh,
So I am very excited to have it, and I it seems like a good afternoon ice cream.
exactly. All right. And in your honor, I chose the Ava DuVernay light caramel action flavor from Ben and Jerry's because
Oh,
she,
I
like me,
love it.
is a filmmaker. And so
Absolutely.
this is vanilla. with salted caramel swirls, graham cracker swirls, and gobs of chocolate chip cookie dough. So don't tell your mom. She might even have a new favorite.
I was about to say, yeah.
Now, butter pecan, I worked at Baskin Robbins when I was a teenager. And
Uh-huh.
yes, butter pecan was definitely kind of like legacy ice cream, right?
Totally, totally, totally. It's like on Grandparents' Day, there's like a rush on the
Mhm.
butter pecan. Yeah.
Mm, yum. Um,
Mm.
so what's now we've talked a little bit about your family. You're eating your mom's ice cream, so perfect. I'd like to ask in this moment, what's the scoop on how you came to care? An early
Mm.
memory of the world being, bigger than just you and your family, and that you might have a role, you kind of feeling a calling to be a part of making the world a better place.
My, when I was a child, when I was very young, I would get anxious. And the thing that cured my anxiety was imagining a um, my life as a subsistence farmer.
Hmm.
And I was really adamant about designing my farm so that I could have all the things I could possibly need. I designed it with a forge so that I could make iron tools, so that I could, I was like all about, small scale agriculture as a 5-year old.
Wow.
And I, it was, I think, born in part of this fear of what happens if you rely on other people and it doesn't work. Like,
Mm.
how do you make sure that everything is taken care of and possible right within your own little world? And that was sort of what kept me feeling like I could go to sleep at night. At the same time, my father was always telling me these stories, guppy stories, about this fish that gets trapped on the dark side of the pond where the shadows from the mountains were, and it was cold, and there was the unexpected, and he never knew what was happening. And it took me a long time to really think back to those stories and realize that they are the two sides of balance, of being able to say, I want to know that I'm okay in myself, but I also want to know that I can explore the world and that there's more to discover and not to be afraid of that. And I think that was that reminder that we have this gift of grace, of being enough, that also gives us this sense of abundance to give to others. And um, I don't know. It's just, I think those two stories combine to just make that feel like not a discovery, but just an essential part of being human.
Wow. Um, this farm design, what were you
Yeah,
like? Were you using crayons and paper or building blocks, or were you on the computer? How were you designing that?
definitely pencils, because I made a lot of changes and I needed an eraser. Definitely not building blocks. It was definitely more precise than that. It was like much more thought through of how many vegetables do I really want to
Wow.
eat? So how big should this vegetable garden be? You know?
How
Um,
long do you think you worked on it? Like weeks,
oh,
months,
yeah,
years?
this was a multi-year process
Oh my God.
of, because you discover things like the iron forge was not part of the original design, but it took me a while to think, well, gosh, if I'm going to have this farm, I'm going to need to be able to replace my tools, and so I'll need a forge.
I
I
love
don't
it.
think I thought about where I would get the iron ore from or things like that, but maybe I need to go back and redesign it.
What are the pull throughs, little 5-year-old Nicholas to Nicholas today? What does that say about some of your core traits, interests, passions, and curiosities that you think pull through to today?
Well, first of all, a love of storytelling, right? A love
Mm.
of that kind of
Mhm.
um, whatever kind of storytelling can be, as much in the way you design a farm as it can be in the way you tell a story of a fish in a pond. Um, Second of all, I think uh, there is I think that desire for security
Mm.
is something we are quite dismissive of.
Mm.
Um, And I think we need to honor it. It's okay to want to feel secure. I
Yeah.
don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a very human thing, right? I think sometimes the ways it manifests can be um, more or less kind or generous or more or less sort of social or antisocial. I don't think if I live in a bunker, under, 20 stories underground, that may not be the most social way to
Yeah.
practice my security. But I think the desire for security, to laugh at that, to think that people shouldn't want that, is to the only people who can laugh at that are people for whom security, who can take it for granted. And I think the more we recognize that, um, I have a 18-month-old daughter, and the thing that I want the most for her is to feel secure,
Mhm.
right? To feel like
Yeah.
she is enough and that she can take a little tumble and someone's going to be there and pick her up,
Yeah.
and that it's not about not taking a tumble. It's actually about knowing that you're going to be secure after you take the tumble.
Oh man, now I've got so many connecting thoughts here. Because ultimately, isn't it fear, which is a form of feeling insecure, that is behind the division that we see right now? I got a quote that I wrote down from one of the pastors. Um, what do I do when what I love is under threat?
Hmm.
That was a comment that speaks to this same, that's a security question. If I love this and my love of it gives me some ballast and makes me feel confident and clear, and that's under threat, what then? So I think we're, unbeknownst to us, we just did like a whole back 360 back to exactly what we wanted to say.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting, these pastors talk a lot about love of God and love of neighbor.
Yeah.
And when I rewatch the movie, I'm always aware of how much what is motivating the pastors is fear of not being loved by God and fear of not being loved by their neighbor.
Mm. Mm.
And that that is, we sometimes think to ourselves, oh, I can love my neighbor, I can love my neighbor. And we don't acknowledge the fact that we're actually quite afraid that maybe our neighbor doesn't love us. We'll
Mm.
drop those muffins by, and then if we don't hear anything in a day, if you don't get a call being like, so I love those muffins, you start to worry. You start to think, wow, maybe
Did I
I
do? Yeah.
did I do something wrong? You
Yeah.
know? And to overcome that fear and to still give love is, I think, you know, it's what Mr. Rogers always said,
Yeah.
that every child needs to know that he or she is loved and capable of loving, right? It's
Yeah.
both sides of that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it was also making me, and you're giving me, this conversation, the film, and then anticipating the conversation that we're going to be having during this series, Thoughts and Prayers. One of the sparks for it was a conversation I had with Robert Rabin from Rabin, which is a public policy advocacy consulting firm based in DC with offices around the country. And we met during a conference and we ate we had drumsticks in the lobby of this hotel and we did the recording on a laptop because that's just how it all worked out. And we were talking and we were wrapping up and he mentioned to me, he said, I think, he goes, I don't know if there's a segue to this, but I just wanted to say that I think that I'm paraphrasing, that folks on the progressive left need to open their hearts to conversations around faith, um, and not just assume that's the other side's thing. We don't do faith. We're not about that. I think that's our way forward. And if we can't, and then he didn't use this third thing idea, but like kind of like there could be a lot of room to move if we open up our hearts and our conversations there. And so I'm going to tell you and all those listening because they're going to hear it too, a prayer that I heard that I use, and it's one of those, I think it's called a meta prayer. You start for yourself, and then like the next concentric circles out from yourself. So I'll start with myself and my husband, and then my kids, and those under my roof and on my street, and I go out. And the prayer is, may they feel safe, may they feel strong, and may they have ease of being.
Mm,
And I have even done it and often do it for the kind of the guy on Pennsylvania Avenue who I don't agree. I am mad at him. And I think, gosh, if he felt safe and secure and had ease of being, that could only help,
Yeah.
right? And then think about my neighbors and those that I know and those that I don't know that are look across the street, and may they feel safe, may they feel strong, may they have ease of being. And I guess in this thoughts and prayers series to share that, I've never said that out loud on air before. Um, Feels like a gift I can give as an idea and maybe a little prompt and a little opening for some other ways to think about how we can have hope and share hope.
Yeah. No, I love that. The word that I often think of in the same category as thoughts and prayers
Yeah.
is a kindness, the
Mm,
noun like that, to do a kindness for someone.
yeah.
Um, because I think part of where thoughts and prayers can run aground for people is it can almost reinforce a sense of powerlessness. It's like you're
Mm,
not doing anything, and
mhm.
maybe you feel bad or maybe other people feel bad. Um, and I wonder sometimes, what would it look like if you can't do something for that person, but there is someone nearby that you can do something for?
Yeah.
And what if you did that? And what if you made that statement? And what could that do instead, right? There are people who are starving, kids who are starving all around the world, right, in places of conflict. And there are also kids who are starving probably less than 10 miles from all of us.
Right.
What if you did something there as a way of speaking to what's happening someplace else,
Yeah.
right? As you keep those people in your thoughts and prayers, what is the kindness that you can do for the person that's nearby? And
Yeah.
how might that radiate in a way that you didn't expect?
It, it guaranteed it does. Guaranteed, right? That energy, right? Of that love and kindness.
Well, to come back to faith, I have the same concern when the progressive left is dismissive of faith. I think to myself, well, we only have three things from the past several thousand years. It's our art, our faith, and our science, right? Those are the only things that really survive.
Mhm.
And they're the same category. They're things that help us understand the world and how to place ourselves in a world that's so enormous. And faith is a really important pillar of that. And I think about faith as like being these stories that have endured. I think about the story of the Good Samaritan, right? It's from Luke, and it's, these two very, you know, should be good people walk by this guy who's been robbed, and this Samaritan who we shouldn't like stops and is like, oh, how can I help? Let me help this person on the side of the road. And now, you know, however you want to think about it, that story has endured for
Mhm.
2,000 years. It's enshrined in our laws. We talk about laws to protect good
Mhm.
Samaritans, right? Um, And whoever that guy was who stopped on the side of the road to help somebody else, right? Whether that story was then rewritten in apocryphal or whatever, someone at some point stopped on the side of the road and helped someone. And 2,000 years later, that act is being remembered, right? I I I hope. How amazing would it be if in 2,000 years people talk about the Good Playful Podcast, and how that reminded people to keep people in their thoughts and prayers in a
Mm.
serious way versus
Yeah.
in a, you know,
Yeah, and in a dismissive or like the sense of
yeah,
there's a lack in doing that. Oh my goodness, I love it. What a great point that that story has endured. That's amazing. Okay, as we wrap up, how do we get people to see the film? Tell me about the tour. Is it going again? Where are you going to be? How can we
yeah.
come visit us? Because I know you told me you like to go where you're invited.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, there are two things that you can do. One is go to leapoffaithfilm.com and put in your email address, and they'll tell you where there are screenings nearby, or host a screening.
Mhm.
I think we feel really strongly that this is a film that you should see with people, not a film that
Mhm.
you should see on the small screen by
Mhm.
yourself. And so,
Mhm.
how do we make that happen? We want to make that happen for every community in the country. Second of all, go to AmericanRevival.us. I think we are taking this on the road in an even bigger way, saying, how do we create these live events where people can come together and feel that sense of hope and then put it into practice? We end all of the revivals with kindness cards where you get to send a kindness to someone, either fill out one side of the postcard with a kindness or fill out one side with an address, and someone else will send you a kindness, right? The idea is to say, when we create these local connections, these connections between people, like what happened in Leap of Faith, like what Fred Rogers did for millions of Americans, we create a fabric that's strong enough to withstand anything. And that means sometimes that your friend of your friend of your friend of your friend you really may not like. But if you and your friend have a close relationship and all those linkages exist, then there's a way that something beautiful might emerge. So these revivals are popping up all over the country. We're doing them in Montgomery and Baltimore and the Cape, San Antonio. Come be a part of them, or suggest that your community become a part of them. And we're really excited to join you.
I love it. Okay, leapoffaithfilm.com and americanrevival.us. Nicholas, I'm thinking too, this would be great centerpiece for Thanksgiving dinners.
Yes.
People coming together, family, community meals that people serve during the holiday season. It feels like well timed. And I think there's a lot of nervousness about the holidays every year now. They're like, oh, because Aunt Sue and Uncle John and, like nobody's sure what to say. Like, this could be an interesting family event.
Absolutely. I joke that it's a year-long Thanksgiving dinner, but one that you actually want to go back to. So, I think it's a perfect watch before Thanksgiving to sort of get yourself in the right headspace to say, okay, these people do love me and I do love them.
Yeah.
How can I let that be more important than the conversation that otherwise might dominate?
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
what might that mean for us going forward?
Yeah, look, well, I know there one of the pastors quote, and we can maybe just this will wrap it all up. She said, this is a love story. She
It's a love story.
She called it a love story, and I would agree. Thank you so much for all the beauty you've brought into the world, and this latest bit of that. And I'm looking forward to supporting the tour and the film and getting the word out. So many blessings, and thank you so much for bringing fun to the serious work of changing the world.
Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
Great, thanks. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to the PlayFull Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know of a leader or organization that's doing good in the world and you'd love to help us help them amplify their message, I would love to have them on the show. Go to the show notes and click there, or go to impactfulinc.com/contact. And that's impactful with 2 L's, inc.com/contact. And let us know who you're thinking about. Can't wait to see you next time.